Hello, and welcome back to A Journeyman's Travels. My name is Daniel Scheifler, your host and principal consultant with Improving. Now, during this series, we have been in the effective executive, and we are going to complete that. And in the last episode, we talked with Drucker's point to put first things first. That is, to focus on what was truly important, and to protect the time for those truly important things by setting our priorities and posterities. Today, we're going to take a transition, and we're going to begin looking at one of the other critical duties for the effective executive, and that is making decisions. But rather than jumping directly into let's make effective decisions, we're going to pull apart the components of an effective decision. Now, the effective executive, in order to make effective decisions, seeks impact, not technique, right? Our goal is not just, oh, well, if you do this and this and this every time, it's going to perform perfect. No. Rather, our goal is to seek true understanding of the problem that's in front of us. What is the actual problem? So that when we make a decision, systemically, it is the right one. It produces the outcome we are truly interested in and allows our company to move forward in that area. Drucker provides the following elements for an effective, clear decision-making process. That is, the truly important features of a decision are: 1, a clear realization that the problem is generic or not, and if generic, can only be solved by a decision that establishes a rule or principle for future action. 2, it defines the specifications that whatever answer or solution to the challenge has to satisfy. That is, put another way, the boundary conditions. Next, it is the thinking through what is the right solution, the solution that fully satisfies the specifications regardless of how unpalatable, before we begin thinking of compromises and adaptations or concessions that will be necessary to make it acceptable. Number 4, building into the decision the action that must be made to carry it out. Whose job will it be to make this new change? And of course, in any system that we make changes on, we're doing this with the best current information. So we have to identify and then capture any feedback which can be used to test the validity and the effectiveness of our decision against reality, so that when it becomes apparent that was the wrong decision, we can change it. Or when it becomes apparent it was the right one, we can use that in future to help others understand. And given how detailed that is, Drucker calls out that this is going to be the most time-consuming element of decision-making. It's never just going to be, if the time to decide is the most for a decision. It is always in converting that decision into actions and into the changes of the organization, which is the most time-consuming. Which, of course, means that for Drucker, the executive who's seeking impact isn't trying to make lots of decisions or even do them quickly. They are seeking to make the decisions about what truly matters so that the organization can advance. This is what the decisions an effective executive focuses on are. Now, the first step, of course, was clear recognition of whether or not the problem was generic or unique. And this all is effectively identification of the problem. After all, an organization is seldom like a car where you might just discover that the main issue is simply by plugging in the chip to check the onboard computer or, checking the dipstick. Sorry, it's not a simple system. Other organizations, being socio-technical systems, made of, you guessed it, people and their processes, are much harder to just see the problem outright. Certainly you'll experience the symptoms, but it's very difficult to diagnose a singular cause. The key element here, though, for Drucker is that the problem either is truly unique, or it's the repetition of some existing systemic mistake. And every time a decision is made, it reverberates back through the organization and through the causes with some new overhead, and it comes back. And if those causes are still in place, the problem remanifests. So constant decision-making, the grand drama of the factory where fires are being put out, things are being expedited, people are running around like mad, and yet it still gets done, truly is a sign that a factory is poorly run. If you literally have someone whose job it is to expedite stuff and they are constantly busy, I guarantee you your system is going for failure. But what's the solution for this, right? if we're already in firefighting mode, what can be done? And it sounds a little odd to say this, but the best way to reduce decision fatigue is just make fewer decisions. What do you mean make fewer decisions? I have to do this to rescue. Okay, hold on. Sure, the fire still needs to be handled so that the business can continue to exist, but if all you're ever doing is making decisions about firefighting, no one's making the decisions about why the warehouse is such a fire hazard. So how does one do that? Where does one figure out where the constant fire is in the industrial drama and stop it from causing another one? And it sounds about like you expect, right? Stop fighting the fires, figure out what's flammable, and fix it. Which means someone else has to be given the duty to fight the fires in the short term, and the true leader, the highest level, needs to pull back and figure out, why am I fighting the fires here all the time? Now, Drucker goes on to suggest that the vast majority of the problems that we experience in an organization are actually just generic, right? Truly generic. They are not unique, not even to our stuff specifically. They're just the standard everyday communication problems. That is distinct from the truly generic problem, but feels unique to the institution, right? It might be generic in that many people face this problem, say in the concept of manufacturing, but the organization in question, which just got into manufacturing, this is the first instance they've ever hit of it. In such a case, I would point you to the concepts from TRIZ. Now, TRIZ is not in the effective executive. It is rather a separate discipline. The Russians, when we were in the Cold War, had a research department under the Navy. And they hired a legitimate genius, go check him out, to then lead this group. And he developed 40 principles for innovation. And one of the core premises under these principles was that the solution for your problem has probably already been invented. It just may be in a different industry or a different discipline. Therefore, get widely read. So if you're looking at this is the first time I've ever seen this happen in my institution, don't assume that's going to be just this generic. Sorry, don't assume it's going to be unique to you and therefore unique forever, but rather check to see if it is generic in your industry, or better yet, just in general for that practice. Maybe everyone is hitting this kind of a problem, no matter what they're manufacturing. It'll just look different. In short, this is an argument to be relatively widely read, and to assume that your problem is not unique to you, and to first check to see if someone else has hit it and what things they considered or found along the way. This will not only speed your personal learning for, hey, saw this problem, tried the solution, that didn't work, tried this other solution. Maybe they've already done that 3 or 4 times, and that you can help to skip to the end because they discovered new problems and give you new things to look for. Either way, researching a little ahead of time will give the leader a better grasp, a better context of what ought to be done and what to look for in making those decisions. Now, all of this to say is that the majority of problems are actually a form of generic problem. But that doesn't mean that there aren't the truly unique existences, right? In the book Anti-Fragile, the concept of a black swan, like the 2008 stock market crash or the 2001 .com bubble bursting, right? Those moments of great historical importance, but the historical data could not have acted as a predictor to it, right? The existing models that we use to determine reality actively fed the creation of this problem. That could be a problem. We need to be aware that there could be indeed a true black swan event that is hitting us, and we need to find a new addressable approach to it, which means the decision may not be just a principles one. It may be a one-off to address this distinct extreme circumstance. But how do you know? You need to think long and hard about whether you're looking at a generic, a unique to me but generic in general, a truly exceptional event, or the early manifestation of a new generic problem. How do you tell the difference between the truly exceptional and the early manifestation? Time. Which oddly puts us in this same situation again of, okay, so if it's going to be taking time for me to learn, then doesn't that mean I just need to make a decision today? Yes, in fact, you probably do. What's there for the right decision? This is where those problem statements and the identification not only of the action needed to be taken to fix it, but the feedback we need to check to see if our decision was an effective one is important. Make decisions as though they were for a generic problem. Make a decision-making rule or principle, and build in the feedback that will say this decision was the right one or not. And if it is, good, then you're seeing most likely the manifestation of a new generic. And if it turns out it's not working, go fix your principles. And if you have to do that maybe 2-3 times, you're probably looking at a black swan and need to take a distinct, directed at this, solve, with a dead-by date, so that the decision gets revisited by force after the event is likely closed, so that the system and the organization can learn in a new and critically important way. Now, in my experience, this is one of those moments where the experience from software comes in handy, right? We have this little rule of 3. If I've seen repetitions 3 different times, the same kind of problem, I definitely know I'm handling a generic, and I need to extract the concept of what's generic from what's specific. And I've found that idea is basically founded on we don't know enough and have to learn. So how do you learn? Well, as I said, you're compelled to act in order to gain new information, right? Figuring out why something is flammable, done, cool. After the fire is under control, but ideally before the next one. So make your decision based upon a starting principle. Go and get new data. Is this the right one? And fix the principles until you determine it is in fact not a generic problem. It is truly exceptional. And then make the decision from there. Now, okay, so we talked about this, great, but now how do I identify the right solution so I can actually advance this cause? Okay, so figuring out why something is flammable is only half the issue. But after you know why, you need to find a way to remediate the situation, which is, of course, not strictly whether thing A is or is not flammable, but rather, how can thing A can and ought to be safely used under the process, or maybe something else is needed to mitigate the flammability, or to remove it. And that means you have to know what is important in the solution. To know if a solution is right, we have to first understand what edges must it conform to. Well, I still need to meet takt time in the process. Okay, so whatever I now need to do either needs to add a step that can fit in takt time or fit within existing steps under takt time. I might need it to still allow these kind of operations, or I might still need it to be flammable because it needs to go into an engine. But prior to going in the engine, I need it not flammable. Boundaries. What has to be versus what would be nice to be. Now, it's of critical importance that you identify the right solution first. Drucker advocates this extremely loudly because no matter how unpalatable it is, working backwards from a palatable solution doesn't actually solve your problem. Working backwards from the true solution to account for compromises is really going to be the only way to be effective. Too often we end up discarding the right answer for an acceptable one and doom ourselves to ineffectiveness because we took a half measure. I hate to use the surgery example, but consider amputation, right? Is amputation the right answer? Seldom is it the right answer, but sometimes it really is. And if you do halvesies in the moment where you're thinking it's probably the right answer, you could die of gangrene, of frostbite, of any number of things that could go wrong between the time you had the partial surgery and the actual amputation. The right solution can only be understood in the conditions that have to be met, and it is from meeting those conditions that we can have a meaningful conversation about what can be compromised on. Because, for example, you could compromise on the nice-to-haves, but if it has to be able to do this and you have to compromise on that, you can't use that solution, and you can't do a halfway because it won't solve the problem. Consider that there are really 2 kinds of compromise, right? Half a loaf of bread is better than no loaf. But half a baby is not like half a loaf. You have to make certain you know the compromise you're making. If you're making a compromise that is a nice to have, yeah, it's better to have half a loaf than all the way, right? This might mean it's still a very manual process rather than an automated one. Okay, fine. But just doing the same thing over again, or, cutting the solution down at the heels where it can't actually do its job, where, no, the workers can't pull the end-on cord. Okay, you've compromised the solution. We can't move on from here because now I have taken a thing that was alive, was potential for growth, and could be effective to something that is dead. Do not confuse the 2 kinds of compromise and make certain you know which kind you're making when you have to identify a palatable solution from the right. And you do that by knowing the conditions that any solution that will actually solve the problem must meet. Now, Today, we talked about how for seeking effectiveness, the effective executive looks for impact, not just make a bunch of quick decisions quickly, but make the important decisions in a way that is lasting. And so they'll look first to understand the true nature of the challenge they're facing there, right? And there are probably going to be some assumptions that are safer to make than others. But assume that the event is a symptom. Look for the true problem. Assume your problems are generic and solve them that way, but test for them being black swans. Solve the generic problem with rules and principles, and identify the right solution by the constraints it must meet. But wait, Daniel, I hear you say, this is only the first half of efficient decision making. Yes! But so deep was this challenge that I thought it best to split this into 2 episodes. And so next time we're going to come back and talk about how, since this decision so far has only been on paper, we're going to now have to work it into the organization and build the feedback in. But I want to leave you with this challenge, right? What are some potential symptoms that you're seeing? What wider pattern might they actually be part of? Look for the generic and the constraints that a solution would need to solve. Thank you for joining me, and I wish you safe journeys, fellow travelers.